The first thing you see after you boot up 10,000 Bullets is a select language screen. The game got localized from Japanese to English and a few other languages, but ultimately only saw a European PAL version, with no information I could find pointing as to why there was no NA release, though if I'm speculating I can say it's most likely that the game didn't sell well enough to get released in America. The original title in Japanese was Tsukiyo ni Saraba. According to Wikipedia, that literally translates to Farewell to the Moonlit Night, which was probably deemed both too long and too gay for any English-speaking audience at the time. That, coupled with the fact that during gameplay there's always a fuck ton of bullets flying everywhere, was most likely what resulted in the title 10,000 Bullets. After you choose a language, the game presents you with the option to switch the video mode to 60 Hz, instead of forcing you to stay on the usual 50 that PAL versions of almost any game normally run at. At the time of the game's release, you could never know what hertz everybody's TV was on, and you don't want anybody to buy the game and not be able to play it as intended because of that. So giving the player this option was undeniably great. Some other PAL releases at the time had this option as well, so it's not anything super special, but it is a good addition nonetheless. After choosing your hertz, you get to see the intro movie, which perfectly encapsulates the game's aesthetic qualities and the exciting feeling that the gameplay can often evoke. It does so by being extremely stylish and fast-paced, just like the game itself. But what elevates it even higher is the music and how well the movie is synchronized with it, probably being designed around the music track from the beginning. The whole game's soundtrack mostly falls under the genre of fast-paced acid jazz combined with some hip-hop verses here and there. And since I'm not much of an expert on music, I'll permit myself some generically vague praising, because I've just got to say that it's one of the best original soundtracks I've ever listened to in my life, even outside of video game music. The fast-paced jazz perfectly complements every part of the game, so much so that I'd say it absolutely wouldn't work nearly as well with any other genre of music. And it can also be great to listen to outside of the game, especially if you wanna hype yourself up. I regularly listen to it when I feel like fucking with some gypsy on the street and watching 20 more of them spawn in waves out of nowhere and try to fight me after that. Just like in the game, and just like fighting gypsies, 10,000 Bullets has a lot of mechanical depth and a high skill ceiling, which are the main reasons why I'm making this video. The game's director Yoshitaka Murayama, who's mostly known for creating the Suikoden series and directing the first 3 mainline Suikoden games, had always wanted to make a shoot 'em up even before directing the first Suikoden, citing a preference for the genre and giving the 1991 shmup Metal Black as an example. In 10,000 Bullets this preference is evident, despite it obviously falling under the third-person shooter category, and more specifically in the bullet time subgenre that as far as I know started with the first Max Payne. The shmup likeliness is what makes this one unique though. 10,000 Bullets doesn't work like the usual third-person shooter that has you mostly using cover to shield yourself from damage. It also doesn't work like any bullet time shooter that has you slowing down or stopping time for just a brief duration. In this game you can freely slow down time and bring it back to its normal speed at almost any moment, and you're purposefully rarely provided with any cover to hide behind by way of level design. What you're expected to rely on in order to avoid damage is mainly the fact that during bullet time every bullet fired by an enemy has a clear trace behind it that allows you to determine its trajectory in the 3-dimensional space and accordingly move out of its way using a number of movement options. Movement with the analog stick allows you to simply get your character out of the way of a bullet or any projectile, but seeing as how you'll very often be facing off against multiple opponents and even swarms of enemies, sometimes that just won't be enough. Your next option is jumping, which works like this. Jumping while not holding any directional button will have your character move vertically straight upwards, allowing you to dodge bullets directly aimed and shot at you by jumping over them. Same thing with holding the stick directly forward or back while jumping, with the difference being that your character will move either directly forward or back on their own y-axis. Holding the stick left or right though results in a different jump that I like to call a flip jump for obvious reasons. This jump moves your character directly either left or right on the x-axis. No diagonal or other types of jump exist in this game, except an unlockable double and triple jump. They make things much more interesting, because they obviously allow you to repeat or change the direction of your jump at most 2 times after your initial jump, but they also allow you to transition from a flip jump to a normal one and vice versa. Why is this important? because it adds immense depth to the way you move in order to avoid damage in this game, and avoiding damage is a must, because the original concept of the game was even closer to the shmup style of design, as it had you dying after getting shot just once. And while that wasn't exactly realized, it doesn't take much more than that to get you killed. That, along with the fact that enemies in this game really want to kill you and will give you no chances to survive, means that you have to use everything you've got and use it with thought and strategy. Let me give you a hypothetical situation that showcases this. If you see a bunch of bullets flying at you from a couple of different directions, barring you from using simple movement to dodge them all, you can decide to use a jump to avoid them, but you have to consider what type of jump and how many are the most appropriate to use, as there's many factors you have to consider in order to make your decision. The obvious ones being the space around you and the obstacles in it, as you're not able to face through walls and structures with your movement. More interesting is that you have to also consider your previous movements, because even though you're most likely moving in bullet time, your enemies almost always have perfect tracking, so if you came to be in your current position by jumping into it from your left, if there's a lot of enemies, then you'll most likely get hit by previously fired enemy projectiles if you jump back in the same direction. You also have to consider the position of each enemy, which is pretty complex in and of itself, as the nature of the game's third-person camera doesn't always allow you to see every enemy on the screen. This is where a couple of genius bits of design come into play in the form of the minimap on the top right of your screen and the enemy markers surrounding the screen's edges. The minimap allows you to see every grunt's position in the playing field, so even when there's a lot of them out of your field of view, you can surmise the trajectory of any bullet they might fire without you directly laying your eyes on it and move accordingly. But how do you know if there's actually a bullet coming at you from off screen, or if you should focus on what's currently in front of you? See these small markers on the sides of the screen? Hope you do, cause I didn't see them until like my third playthrough. They help you keep track of any off-screen grunts, without you needing to take your eyes off of what's in front of you in order to look at the minimap. But what's even more helpful about them is that they flash red whenever any of these sneaky chuckle fucks shoot a bullet at you. So hypothetically, if you see one of them flash red, you know that you're about to be shot from off screen, and you know from where. But if you're unsure of the exact location or just need more specific information, you can look at the minimap and see who the shooter probably is and the most likely trajectory of the bullet he's sending at you. This makes the game completely fair, even if you're getting shot from out of your sight, and furthermore ups the cool factor of the gameplay by a lot, as it essentially allows you to dodge bullets that your character did not and could not have seen coming. A lot of action movie heroes do this shit, and the fact that this was made possible in this game outside of a cutscene or a quick time event, and in pure gameplay requiring skill and good use of information in order to pull off, is great. And I'm not currently aware of any other game that has the mechanics in place in order for the player to be able to do this outside of pure accident. The game's sound design is also good enough to be of use in terms of using the sound of a fired gun to tell when and where a bullet is coming from, but it isn't something you can solely rely on because of the usually chaotic soundscape the game has going for it, that's made up of the fast jazz music and the many sounds of gunshots and explosions, which makes the minimap and markers that much better as design pieces. Oh, and by the way, we're still not done with the jumping hypothetical. Rockets, grenades, and exploding environmental objects are also factors in making a decision, as even if your jump isn't gonna lead to you directly getting hit by a rocket, for example, it could lead you into one that's gonna hit something else like the ground or a wall and explode, still resulting in you taking damage. Shooting bullets from your own guns also plays a big part in deciding your movements. It has some mechanics tied to jumping as well, but for now I specifically talk about how if you do a basic jump and shoot, for a couple of shots your character will bounce up in the air a bit, and this shit adds even more complexity. If you're up in the air after doing a basic jump and you see that there's enemy projectiles under you that will hit you if your jump finishes its natural trajectory, then you can fire a few bullets that will bounce you upwards and keep you in place for a few moments, letting the projectiles under you pass forward, allowing you to safely complete your jump. This bounce will always occur whenever you fire your first few bullets during a basic jump, meaning that you can choose to use it at any point during your jump as long as you haven't fired too much bullets yet. The bounce will also reset if you do another basic jump no matter what the previous jump was or how many bullets you fired during it, which adds even more complexity that I hope I don't need to explain or give examples for at this point. As a side note, jumping can also be used to reach higher ground, around, but there's not many opportunities for you to do this, as levels are rarely designed with any higher platforms that you can comfortably stand on, which is one critique I have for the game. Mechanically, the game allows for a lot of verticality with all of the aforementioned jumping you can do, but in terms of level design there's barely any, and that's a shame, as I can easily imagine some interesting levels that can make great use of it, and serve to break up the linear corridor type design of most of the levels. Maybe they can design some levels like that in a sequel. Oh wait, this Giga fucking died and the game got panned by quote-unquote critics and sold like shit everywhere, because nobody understood its complexities and how to really play it. Even the Japanese didn't seem to get and like this game very much, with my favorite Google translated line from one of the reviews being, "If you want to enjoy the unfortunate Matrix, you should definitely buy this." There's also this other guy calling it a 2000 yen frisbee. Getting back on track though, I've talked about pretty much everything you have to consider before you jump in order to avoid damage from normal enemies. But there's also a lot more ways to do that, with the final core method being using the avoid ability. When you press the button you've chosen to set the ability to, your character will start their dodge animation that changes depending on what direction you're dodging in. There's also a couple of variations of some dodge animations, with a specific example I can point to being Crow's backwards dodge animation having two different animations that I think just cycle between each other on a random basis. Every character has at least 4 different dodge animations for each direction you can dodge in. As far as I know, each character has some variations in their animations, which can be a small but still good contribution to avoiding repetitiveness. And on a more subjective note, they're also all pretty cool. After you activate this ability and during its whole animation, your character gets blessed with invincibility frames, making every bullet that would otherwise hit you during that time phase right through you. But it doesn't make you impervious to everything, and it's not that easy to use. Rockets, grenades and explosions as a whole will still hit you during a dodge, so you usually can't just mindlessly spam it and are required to use it thoughtfully. Especially in the second half of the game, where every normal enemy encounter will have at least a couple of goons that are ready to explode all over you at any moment. You also have to think about your gun gauge whenever you choose to use it, which is this little orange bar right under your HP. And using avoid costs a decently big chunk of it. Using bullet time also drains it, and since you guarantee to die or at the very least lose a big chunk of your HP if you stay outside of bullet time for a few seconds less than it takes you to forget somebody's name after they just introduce themselves to you, you can't be reckless with your gun gauge usage, specifically in this case with abusing the avoid ability. It having these negative aspects ensures that the player doesn't just constantly use the iframe ability to avoid damage, and has to use all of their other different techniques that have a lot of quirks and depth themselves, resulting in a complex and skillful dodging system which can be really fun to engage with. These other techniques that I'm talking about include everything I've mentioned up to this point, but there's also even more of them, though since they're tied to certain abilities and techniques, I'll mention their evasive qualities when I get to them, cause for now I've got to explain the other half of what makes this game worth playing and talking about, and that's shooting your fucking gun, my nigga. When shooting in this game, you can either choose to fire a shot whenever you feel like it, or go for the much better critical shot by timing your button press with the rhythm game like moving reticle that appears when you lock onto an enemy. If you fire just as or a little before it goes red, your bullet will have an orange trace behind it, and more importantly do much more damage and shoot your enemies up in the air if the shot kills them. Though the critical shot seems to have no drawbacks, there are still multiple things you have to consider before you start firing, mainly because of the way your gun gauge meter works. If you fire a couple of bullets in quick succession and hit an enemy with them, you start a combo, as indicated by the combo counter on the left side of the screen. The bigger your combo is, the more gun gauge you get after you finish it. And while comboing with critical shots is possible, it's a bit harder to do, as you have to fire your shot exactly when the reticle goes red. Fire early and you reset the reticle to its base position, resulting in you not firing a critical shot and having to wait more in order to fire another one. Fire a little late and you'll probably get your critical shot, but you'll most likely lose your combo. Racking up the combo counter with criticals is also much slower because of this, so if you're in a situation where you're in need of gun gauge, most likely in order to keep your bullet time going, just smashing the fire button may be a better choice. All of this matters because at the end of each level you get hit with a result screen that grades your performance, and one of the criteria, at least for the main character, is going going to be critical rate, which is graded based on the percentage of critical shots out of all the bullets you fired. Not every player is gonna care about grades though, especially if they're only there to serve as intrinsic motivation. That's where another bit of great design is seen in this game. The higher your grade is, the more skill points you get, meaning that you'll be able to buy new moves or upgrade old ones much sooner than you would if you didn't care about the grade system. And this is complemented by the fact that most skill upgrades in this game make a big difference. Getting the triple jump is pretty important, but it doesn't cost that much, so it isn't as much of a factor here. On the other hand though, upgrading your avoid skill is pretty costly, but also very much worth it, as with each upgrade it uses up less and less gun gauge, which you can also upgrade independently. Again, for a pretty hefty price that's also very much worth it. Arguably the most important skill to upgrade is your bullet time ability, as each tier after the first one allows you to move faster while everything around you gets slower. If you remain on a lower tier of bullet time, you also get outskilled by some bosses that appear a bit later into the game and have their own higher tier bullet time ability, that in this situation would allow them to live out their time stop fantasies with you. Another skill that's almost of equal importance in terms of upgrade priority is your HP, because as I said, it's pretty easy to get completely BTFO'd in this game, especially if you fuck up your gun gauge control. Upgrading your HP will allow you to survive some of those fuck ups. There's also a lot more offensive and defensive abilities to upgrade and consider, though I'll talk about them more in depth later. What you need to know now is that they also cost a pretty penny and are mostly worth it too, so ultimately caring about the grade you receive at the end of a level can be pretty closely tied to your survival and success in the next one, especially if you're not skilled enough at the game yet. So your critical shot rate is something to care about and consider while gunning through each stage, which adds depth to your decision making in the moment-to-moment gameplay. One more thing to add about the skill point upgrade system right now is that some skills and skill upgrades are gonna be locked until certain points of the game, so even if you have enough points, you won't be able to get them until the game allows you to. This doesn't affect the importance of getting a good grade for more points though, as there's almost always something to use them up for, and even if you end up saving them for a certain ability, you are gonna end up using them up at a later point, and you don't wanna end up not being able to upgrade something important because you decided to be lax with your grades. Even if you aren't gonna go to Assassin University or become a cop and shoot black people, your shooting grades are still important. Now, as I mentioned before, to fire those critical shots and really to be able to play the game efficiently, you need to make use of the lock-on system, which is one of the few things I have some critiques for. It's pretty standard in terms of the way it works, except that there are a few quirks to it that can be at best presented as issues that you can at least work around. The biggest one that can affect gameplay the most is that environmental objects such as cars and exploding barrels can be locked onto. The problem with this arising from the fact that there is no priority system attached to the lock-on mechanic, meaning that if there are a few enemies in front of you standing at a decent amount of but still very dangerous distance, and a car that's right next to you or even right behind you, you most likely lock onto the car, and depending on the car's location, possibly turn your whole character around to face it, which could result in you taking damage that you would have otherwise not taken. This is thankfully only a big problem in one of the stages that takes place on the street. It has much more environmental objects than any other level, but it does get really bad on this stage, especially when you're on your first playthrough and don't expect it. The workaround is either learning to switch targets really fast whenever you lock onto something you didn't intend to lock onto, or just destroying all environmental objects in a level so locking onto them won't bend you over and fuck you up later on. But even though you can get around it, it is still an issue. The way to fix this on the developer's side would have been to make sure that if the player in their current position is able to lock onto an enemy or an environmental object, the enemy character takes precedence over the object in terms of what the lock-on system should decide to lock onto. Every other quirk the system has can be dealt with by learning to switch targets quickly, or by knowing that it's usually gonna lock onto an enemy that your character is directly facing, unless there's someone or something else really close by in any other direction. And you can even use that to your advantage by manually turning around, skipping the turnaround maneuver that your character usually does when he locks onto something behind him, which is slower than a manual turn and usually prevents you from shooting while your character is carrying his guns over to the new direction he's facing. This means that if you want to play efficiently, you can't just mindlessly use the lock-on system to guide your guns to their targets. You have to put some work in yourself. Ultimately, you can also learn to deal with all these quirks by playing the game a lot and getting more experience with it, which is thankfully possible because the system isn't as horrible as some crybaby reviewers made it out to be. They also complain about the camera system when there's nothing wrong with it. It's a normal camera system that works exactly as it should. It even doesn't shit itself in the situation that you could expect it would. So honestly, I have no fucking clue what these guys' problem was. Now let's get to the actual fun part of shooting. Pulling the trigger and watching the lights go out. There's also a couple more mechanics tied to the critical shot that I wanna talk more in depth about first though. Juggling and crowd control. As I mentioned before, if your critical shot kills an enemy, it will send it up in the air, which looks cool but also serves a gameplay purpose. Any dead body flying in the air can be repeatedly shot for the purpose of racking up your combo counter to get more gun gauge. But why would you shoot a dead person when shooting at a living one is 10 times more fun? Well, in a hypothetical situation where you just started juggling an enemy right in front of you, it might be safer and faster to rack up a combo on its dead body and restore your gun gauge, depending of course on enemy positioning and the amount of gun gauge you have left. It's something that can help you a lot in certain situations, but as a trade-off for that, it can also mess with your flow by making your bullets hit a dead body when they were actually meant for a living one. What ultimately tips it over to being more on the player's side though is the fact that usually when you have a group of enemies that are bunched up together real close, you can position yourself in a way that leads to a larger size of the critical shots, making your individual bullets hit multiple targets at once. This does require really good positioning though, which can lead to you getting hit if you focus on doing this particular trick too much. And the fact is that the hitboxes, at least in this particular case, can be kinda finicky to deal with. In summary, juggling and crowd control are mechanics that expand your options as a player, but also require skill to use and the will to learn to work around their drawbacks, which is a great way for mechanics like this to work. They can help you if you make use of them intelligently, but they can also stunt you if you're not skilled enough to deal with their negative aspects and quirks. Now, before we get ahead of ourselves, you need to remember that in order to shoot your guns, you need to have bullets in them. Reloading can be done by either refraining from shooting your guns for a moment, after which your character starts reloading their guns automatically, or by manually pressing the reload button. The option to have it happen semi-automatically is nice to have, but the manual reload will always be faster and more useful as long as you're quick enough with your button presses. The special thing about reloading in this game is that you can do it during a lot of other actions, resulting in gameplay that has you constantly multitasking by, for example, letting you reload while you're stuck in a dodge animation, which increases the amount of thought you have to put into your actions as well as raising the mechanical skill ceiling. The game also doesn't hold your hand when it comes to reloading, as trying to shoot with no bullets in your guns will result in a clicking sound, signifying their emptiness. The simple act of shooting, removed from any of the aforementioned mechanics, also has a lot of that by itself, in that your bullets can be used in a multitude of ways, other than just using them to directly kill people. Any rocket, grenade and molotov cocktails flying in the air can be shot at and subsequently stopped from hitting or reaching you, but you still have to be careful that you don't shoot them when they've gotten too close to you. Since the game doesn't have a free aim mode, this will either happen accidentally or be done by positioning your character so that their shots hit them, which isn't ideal and is a good argument as to why free aiming might have been a good addition to the game. Environmental objects such as barrels and hanging metal bars can be shot at in order to cause your enemies some accidents as well, and you can also disable any traps that are part of the level design or dynamically set up by the opposition. This is one of the only areas in which the game is mechanically lacking though. Any explosive that's thrown or shot at you by an enemy will only be able to hurt you, so even if you cause it to explode earlier and maybe catch some enemies in the explosion, that just won't work, which isn't good. I can accept that friendly fire between enemy characters isn't implemented, as with the amount of bullets flying around, that will probably result in the player mostly getting their job done for them, essentially preventing them from playing and possibly enjoying the game as intended. But shooting an explosive mid-air is something that happens rarely enough and takes enough skill to pull off that the player should be allowed to make use of it offensively, which could probably be done by making the explosive recognize that if it was activated by a player bullet, it should be able to damage the player and any enemy entity that gets caught by its explosion. Any trap set down by an enemy during gameplay will also not damage your opponents even if you make them get hit by it. Using an enemy's trap against them would be great to have as an option and could feel very satisfying to pull pull off. I can't see any reason why you're not allowed to do this, as if they could deal damage to your enemies, these traps still wouldn't be numerous enough to affect the intended gameplay. I guess we'll never know. And now that I've shown you a picture of a black person, I guess we can talk about running. There is no run button in this game, but there is a trick you can use involving the kick up ability, which is most likely an intended mechanic. Seeing as how without it, using the main character Koro, you can complete most of the stages fast enough to get the maximum rank on your clear time, because Koro doesn't have any other way of moving at a higher speed. Kick up, while serving its main purpose, works and can be used much like a grab in a fighting game. If your opponent is blocking your bullets, which some enemy types can do, then you can use kick up to get through that block and still fuck them up. You can also use it if you still wanna attack while your guns are empty or while you're actively reloading them. It can also just be used as an attack whenever you feel like it, though in terms of pure offensive capabilities, it's usually not anywhere near as effective as your guns. Meaning that if you see me do this shit, it's cause I'm trying to be cool. Trying to be part of the cool kids club. The trick to using it to move faster is to just use the fact that before your character does the actual kick up, he'll get a running start that causes him to move much faster than he does at his base speed. You can cancel the kick up animation by using the avoid ability just before it starts, and it also won't occur if there are no enemies nearby, so if you gotta go fast, you can just spam it as long as nobody's near you. Doing that will boost you straight forward in the direction that your character is facing, but doing it with an enemy nearby will lock your character onto them and send him running towards them, which is something that you have to get used to if you wanna do the kick up trick during combat, which can be very beneficial to do, obviously because of the faster movement it provides you with for a moment, but also because it seems to have some invincibility frames, evidenced by the fact that I usually don't get damaged by any bullets while I'm using it, even if they go right through me. I've explained now a big part of why this game is of great quality in terms of pure gameplay and mechanics, so take something of a break and talk about its other interesting aspects for a bit. After you start a new game and get through the opening cutscene and dialogue sequence, you're met with a screen that allows you to move through the game's different locations, which, when selected, will either send you straight into a level or provide you with a dialogue sequence. You can essentially choose the level of your involvement and immersion in the story as a player, by either visiting every place on the map after every mission and plot relevant dialogue sequence, or just continuously gunning it straight to the main locations mission after mission, which are almost always outright pointed out to you, so you seldomly have to wander around from place to place to figure out where you have to go. There's a few instances in which you have to check every location until you hit the right one, as the location that will send you to your next mission isn't always obvious, though that happens rarely enough that it isn't a big problem. They still could have made sure that never happens by placing a marker on each location that will send you to a level, differentiating it from those that will just give you some extra dialogue. The lack of such a marker might have been a deliberate decision in the case that the developers wanted the player to wander around the locations a bit for one reason or another, but that seems unlikely, seeing as how the player is given full control over how much or how little extra dialogue they engage with before proceeding to the next stage. So it's either a deliberate design decision that's incongruent with the overall freedom the game gives you in this aspect, or just a simple oversight. It's not a big problem, but it's also not ideal either way. Another issue here is that every time you move onto a location or select an option from the menu that transitions you into another screen, the background music restarts from the beginning, which can get really annoying if you're moving from location to location in order to get all the extra dialogue. The music constantly starts over, causing you to get tired of its beginning and also to never hear the track all the way through, unless you deliberately stop yourself from doing anything, which isn't good, especially because the music tracks that play in these sections of the game are great and worth fully listening to. I doubt that it was hard to make the background music just continue playing instead of restarting when you go into another screen. I also doubt that nobody noticed this shit before the game released, so I can't confidently speculate as to why this problem wasn't fixed. Maybe they just decided that it's not an issue, but that doesn't sound very plausible. A positive aspect of the way background music is used in this game is that most, if not all levels and boss fights are long enough for you to hear the whole tracks that play during them. A lot of games have an issue with cutting off their music tracks before they get to fully play out, which can be annoying, especially if a track you really enjoy gets cut off early, and even cause the player to never hear the best parts of a given music track that could have potentially amplified their enjoyment of the game had they heard it during gameplay. 10,000 Bullets is designed in a way that allows for its music tracks to play all the way through, which is great, but in general that just can't always be the case, making this a problem that's rarely fixable. The reverse of this can also be a problem as well in some cases. Some music tracks can play and loop themselves for too long, potentially causing the player to get tired of them, and depending on how much they dislike those individual tracks, maybe even affect their enjoyment of the game in some quantity. On the other hand, the player might like a certain track enough that they're happy to hear it loop on itself X amount of times. But through a more objective point of view, it's safe to say that having more variety in the usage of the music that plays in your game is gonna please the most amount of people. This is not an unquestionable rule that everyone has to follow or anything, but it is true in a more general sense. 10,000 Bullets doesn't have this problem at all. There are 7 different tracks that play during the different normal stages, and after about 50 hours of playtime and some amount of listening outside of playing the game, I still feel like I haven't listened to them enough. I attribute that to their quality as songs and them matching my taste as a listener, but also to the fact that you usually never listen to the same song played during a stage more than twice in a row, which isn't something a lot of other games can be praised for. There's also 2 different boss fight tracks with an extra third one for the encounters with the main antagonist, a unique song for the 2 tutorial levels, 3 unique ones that play in the location select menu during the first 3 chapters that would then get periodically switched out along with the 4th unique one during the rest of the chapters, a unique song for the character select menu, a unique song that plays while reading through the last dialogue sequence and selecting your character for the last level, and finally another unique song that plays during the last semi-playable sequence before the final boss fight. There's also the opening and ending songs, but I'm not really counting them here. All this to say and prove that the use of music in this game is quite varied, which can really make the experience that much better as a whole. A few of the tracks have rap vocals in them, some of which came from the sample pack called Master Beats Climax 9. Japanese composers from around the time of this game's release were probably passing this CD around like a fucking blunt, because you can find bits and pieces of its samples used in a ton of game OSTs from around that time period. The vocals add a lot to the tracks they're used in 10,000 Bullets in terms of variety and maybe hype if you're a fan of the mix between jazz and rap. And the composers even avoided putting a sample with a slur in it, unlike some of their allegedly unaware colleagues, which depending on who you ask may be either good or bad. Returning to more gameplay related analysis, this game has a small yet in a way significant problem with interrupting gameplay in order to needlessly direct the player's attention to a piece of information that they could have otherwise easily become aware of themselves without the need for any interruption. It's a small problem because it only happens when the game decides it needs to show you that the doors you came through have closed behind you in a small cutscene, which doesn't happen too much. The significance of this problem comes from the fact that it completely interrupts gameplay, sometimes even when you're in the middle of combat, which can be very annoying and maybe even cause you to take damage that you otherwise wouldn't have taken, which is pretty unfair. What makes it worse is that the information that the doors behind you have closed isn't hard to obtain or parse. You either see that the doors are closing behind you as they're in the middle of doing so, or you see that they're closed a bit later, which even if it somehow comes as a surprise, you should be able to react to quite easily if you even need to. The game requires you to deal with things that are much harder to react to in order to complete it, and it doesn't hold your hand for any of them. So these interruptions are really inconsistent with the rest of the game's design philosophy. In a more general sense, interruptions in the middle of gameplay, especially this type of completely needless ones, are never ideal. They can negatively affect a lot of parts of the experience. For example, the level of your immersion in the game's world, which can get heavily affected by the severing of the connection between player and player character. Or like the example from this game, they can cause a disruption in the gameplay that leads to a small yet needless moment of confusion once the perspective switch is over. Or even become an unfair element that causes you to take damage, which can also cause a certain amount of frustration. There's more to say about this problem as it is very widespread among video games as a whole and can get really bad in some games. But as 10,000 Bullets has a comparatively small amount of instances of it, I'll save that for a different time. Another thing that I'm not exactly crazy about, but is also not too much of a problem as it only appears once and that this game also shares with a lot of others, is the usage of unwinnable boss fights. Unwinnable boss fights in games can make use of the unique interactive aspect of the medium to directly show the player that their enemy is much stronger than them, which can improve the player's level of immersion as their feeling of weakness or lack of skill during the fight usually actually matches with the player character's feelings or power level in the narrative, which achieves what could be called ludonarrative harmony, as opposed to the term ludonarrative dissonance. Your average game doesn't strive to achieve this narrative harmony as much as it should, so making use of this trope can have a pretty positive effect on the experience, especially if it's executed well. For example, you can have a payoff where the player fights the same enemy they fought during the unwinnable fight later on in the game, and compare their skill level, power, and overall feeling of mastery to the level they were on before, which could provide a great sense of satisfaction. The problem with this trope is that when it's not designed well, like if for example you manage to win even though you weren't intended to, it can lead to issues, like the game ignoring that you actually won and proceeding like that just didn't happen, which can be frustrating and affect immersion and also makes you feel like you're playing against low tier god.
You lose. No, I did not fucking lose. You lose. No, I didn't lose. You lose. No, I didn't lose, man. You lose. Actually, I win. You lose. Did I? No, I didn't fucking lose nothing. No, you lose.
In some cases the game can also stop the fight in the middle and pretend that you were losing while in reality you weren't, or cheat to make you lose even though you were on your way to win, which can happen in 10,000 bullets. The first fight with the main antagonist Judas is an unwinnable boss fight, which you can get really close to beating before Judas gets on low HP and starts dodging and not getting hit by any one of your attacks. Not even the ones that he was getting hit by before, which can feel very unfair, especially because it's so obvious that the game is stepping in and telling you, no, you have to lose this one. They should have either made him dodge everything from the start, so you get the feeling that he's just too good instead of feeling that the game is wagging its finger at you, or the ideal way of doing it would have been to allow you to quote unquote win, and make a slightly different cutscene which in some way recognizes that you won the fight but still ultimately leads to the same outcome, so the story can proceed the way it's supposed to. Sekiro does this by having a wild shuriken fly at Wolf thrown by an unseen person from an unseen location and implying that him parrying it left an opening in his guard, which happens after he hypothetically bent Genichiro over while parrying his every swing. That's not a really good way to do it, but it is still great that you are allowed to win if you're skilled enough, and have it be recognized by the slight change in the cutscene. A hypothetical alternative cutscene for 10,000 bullets could show how Koro winning this fight forces Judas to use all of his power to defeat him, or just some shit like that. Anything would have been better than just watching this monkey jump around and dodge everything that he was getting hit by just a few seconds ago. Boss fight quality as a whole in this game can range from really good to kinda bad, with a lot of room for improvement in some cases. The first boss is this guy called Keats. You fight him for a bit at the end of the first level, but he runs off in the middle of the fight like a fucking pussy, but you do get to fully fight him at the end of the next level. The most interesting thing about his fight is that he does this move where he makes 3 clones of himself that will shoot at you and do a little dance to turn invincible like he does. The most interesting thing about his fight is that he does this move where he makes 3 clones of himself that will shoot at you and do a little dance to turn invincible like he does. The minimap only shows the location of the real Keats, which rewards any observational players and provides them with a decision. Do you try to get rid of all the clones first so you can more safely focus on the real one, or do you just try to kill Keats as fast as possible while dodging all the extra fire from the clones? The grading system is also a factor in this decision, as boss fights count as part of the levels as a whole, meaning that the time you take during the fight will count towards your clear time and affect your grade. So if you're worried about your grade, you might want to focus on the real Keats as much as you can. Having the first boss be able to be outsmarted by the use of the minimap can serve to reinforce its importance and usefulness in the game as a whole, which is great as it lowers the chance of the player not looking at it and subsequently getting frustrated because they feel like they're missing information. Keats also serves to introduce the player to the universal knockdown mechanic that every boss has. Every boss's HP bar can be separated into chunks, and after they lose one of those chunks of HP, they always get knocked down for a certain amount of time, no matter what they were doing when they lost it. This adds some depth to every boss fight and raises the skill ceiling, as knowing this means that you can sometimes choose between dodging an attack or keeping up your barrage of bullets in order to knock the boss down before they're able to hit you, which also results in you taking less time to finish the fight, which as I've already said can be important for your grade and clear time. The only downside to this mechanic is that it can sometimes leave you with nothing to do except wait for the boss to get up. Another great aspect of the game is that because it allows you to turn bullet time on and off whenever you want, you can control the overall flow of gameplay. Turning bullet time on when you want it to be slower and turning it off when you want it to go back to being as fast as it normally is. This is really fucking great. No other game allows you the freedom to tweak its overall flow this much, and it can be really fun. Especially when you get good at the game and are able to turn this shit on and off without getting hit to make the game go faster. This means that you can turn bullet time off when you knock down a boss so they can get up faster, but some of these guys still take a really long time to get up, and since most of them will get knocked down at least 5 times during their fight, it can result in a lot of mundane waiting. From a different point of view though, this allows you to take a little bit of a break from the action as well, which depending on who you are as a person might be very appreciated. The thing is that you can always use the pause menu if you want a break, so these long getting up animations ultimately serve no good purpose. Don't get me wrong though, the knockdown mechanic is still great, I just wish that the bosses would get up much faster, maybe almost instantly, so the flow of the fights doesn't get broken up so hard and so often. Another way to make this aspect of the knockdown mechanic better without changing the get up animations would be to make normal enemies come into the stage whenever the boss gets knocked down, so you have something to do instead of waiting. Something similar to this can happen in some boss fights, as some of the bosses have the ability to call in reinforcements, and sometimes they'll do it before you knock them down. Keats can also get knocked down while he has his clones running around, which also gives you something to do instead of waiting. In his case, they could have made it so when you knock his ass out, a couple of his clones appear to keep you busy. These occurrences are only coincidental though, and should have been deliberately implemented as a universal boss mechanic. One thing that is universal across all bosses though is the way that their arena designs factors into the gameplay of their boss fights. I'll talk about them in specific as we go through each boss fight, as they all affect the fights that take place on them in different ways. Keats' arena has a big object in the middle that on one hand can be used to create space between you and him if you need it, or it can be used to block some of his attacks by way of smart positioning, but on the other hand can serve as an obstacle that prevents you from dealing damage to him, which you can deal with by jumping above it, so it's no longer in your line of sights, or by just moving around it. Having to play around its existence gives the fight an interesting dynamic, and adds depth that the fight would otherwise lack had it taken place on a completely flat arena. One annoying thing about this fight is that Keats has this little gay dance move that gives him iframes during its whole duration, and that seemingly only exists to waste your time by prolonging the fight, but I assume that he was allowed to do it by himself first, so whenever he calls up his clones a few moments later, the player knows that he, and by extension his clones, can use that ability, which eradicates any possible confusion the player could have otherwise had during a heightened moment of action. This isn't really a good reason to allow Keats to spam it so much by himself though. They could have just made him do it once before he uses his clone ability, like at the start of the fight, or even disallow him from using it alone as a whole, as the possible confusion that this move could cause would be dispelled quite quickly by most players, because it wouldn't be hard to understand that he and his clones have iframes while they're dancing, even during the chaos that the clones invite to the fight. On another note, an interesting detail about Keats is that when he does this move where he splits himself into a couple of clones and shoots at you without them fully splitting off and running around, you can still lock onto the clones if you use the switch target button, which serves no mechanical purpose but is still just a nice detail. Another one is that a flock of birds will fly above or through the arena here and there, and they actually have collision, which thankfully never affects the fight as they pass through very quickly and rarely manage to bump into you. Keats also gets to go out like the coolest motherfucker in the cutscene that plays after you defeat him.
Last chance. Did somebody hire you?
I'm not going to tell you.
Even if I fire a round right between your eyes? As a realist, you know what'll happen.
Yes, I know, but I'm no coward. Very well. I'll tell you one thing.
Start talking.
That blood that runs through your veins, that gives you your powers. Others have it and they can sense it in you. You'll be killing until the day you die. Do it.
Goodbye.
One obviously bad thing in the cutscenes in this game is that they not only look kinda retarded most of the time, but the English dub voice acting in them is also some of the worst voice acting you ever hear. Mostly because they just use people that have no voice acting credits and probably no VA experience at all. The worst part about it is that it's not even funny how bad it is most of the time. It's just dog shit. What is funny is that I've played the game enough that I've grown to actually like it a lot, especially Judas's voice, which can be halfway decent sometimes. But objectively it's clear that the game would be much better off with good voice acting. Thankfully there's an undubbed version of the game that has you listening to the Japanese dub during cutscenes and even during the gameplay itself, as characters will make some sounds here and there and even have a few voice lines. Though those aren't as bad, or at least not as noticeable in the English dub. I don't know Japanese, so I can't exactly comment on the Japanese voice acting's quality, but I can say that it can make it a little easier to take the cutscenes more seriously.
あなたがトニーオファミリーのクロー、ブラッディクローですね。そこまで有名になった覚えはないがな。俺をやっても名は挙げられないぞ。名はいらない。欲しいのはあなたの命です。こだわるな。恨みを買った覚えはない。なぜだ。戦いこそがガンスリンガーの掟ですよ。
Most of the Japanese voice actors also had a lot of prior experience in the industry, so I assume that they had to have done a better job than whatever this shit is.
Lightning, Joe, ain't going out like no chump. Time for me to use my good stuff. Watch this. Gotcha!
Crow?
Yeah, I got something to tell you.
Me too.
On the topic of cutscenes, there's an emulation problem with them that during gameplay with an emulator that syncs their audio, causes them to get cut off early and even causes the game to crash sometimes. Obviously this is not the fault of the game itself, but it is worth mentioning, as if you're gonna emulate it you should skip most of the cutscenes and just watch them on YouTube, in order to avoid any problems and fully see them through. At least this creates some funny moments in the English dub.
I got some of your mother's blood in me as well.
Get out of that chair so I can put you in a grave. I'm taking my life.
The credits at the end of the game are also affected by this problem and can sometimes get so fucked up that they don't fully play out, and allow you to save your cleared game, which is really bad, as in order to play on hard difficulties you have to load your cleared game save file and select the newly unlocked difficulty. There's no other way to do it. To not get your day ruined by this shit, you should always save after you beat the first level of chapter 7, so if you beat the final boss fight after and don't get to save your shit, you can always load your save, beat the boss again and hope that it doesn't get messed up this time around. Unlike the English voice acting, the writing can be quite charming at times and seemingly have ambitions towards creating an interesting world that somewhat come to fruition, but are ultimately held back by a lack of depth and interesting exploration into any particular theme, at best serving as a decent but surface level explanation of each character's motives, which might at least help with immersing yourself in the game's world and improve your overall experience just a little bit. Judging by the quality of the cutscenes, and by the fact that your best friend that betrays you later in the story is inconspicuously named Judas, it's safe to say that the gameplay was the bigger focus here. The second boss you fight is Lightning Joe. He just might have the best boss fight in the game, as every single attack of his will test you in different ways, but also allow a decent amount of freedom in how you deal with them. The timing and spacing of his shots, coupled with the speed that his bullets move towards you with at your current bullet time level and the fact that he'll teleport and jump around the area, forces you to switch the direction in which you're looking at if you wanna keep shooting at him, resulting in you having to look away from a pack of bullets that are slowly but surely traveling towards you and deal with them coming from off screen. If you remember the position for which he fired the bullets from before he teleported, you can use simple movement to get away from their trajectory, which allows you to keep shooting at him as you move, but is also risky, as you could have made a mistake while determining their trajectory or maybe memorize them incorrectly. The safer option is to use the avoid ability to dodge away, but since you can shoot while using it, you are allowing him to set up his next attack without getting damaged in return and subsequently get ahead in the fight. Another great move of his that he'll call out like a chuny retard is Lightning Charge. He'll charge up for a moment, then charge at you really fast and take off quite a bit of your HP if he hits you. One bad thing about it is that it looks like you can jump over it, but in my experience I always got hit when I tried to. Maybe it's possible to dodge it with an early side jump, maybe even a double or triple normal or side jump, but that just wouldn't be as efficient as using the avoid ability. unless you're lacking in the gun gauge department. If you choose to dodge this way, your timing has to be pretty good, as he'll fly at you at a surprisingly high speed, even in bullet time. What's great about this move is that sometimes he'll decide to delay it and manage to catch you at the end of your dodge if you got baited to do it by his delay. When his HP gets kinda low, he can also start spamming lightning charges one after another, which require really good timing and positioning to dodge. You can also use positioning to make him charge into an obstacle, which results in no special interactions or anything like that, but allows you to keep shooting at him instead of having to dodge. It's a great move that puts a lot of your skills to the test and has different variations so you can never get fully used to it and dodge it mindlessly, but it also allows for some freedom in how you deal with it. His most dangerous move is Lightning Strike, which consists of him teleporting right next to you and creating something like an 8-pointed star symbol on the ground that spins around until he activates the attack, damaging you if you're standing on any part of the symbol when he does. If you're too slow to get out of the attack's range before it activates, which you actually need to anticipate your movement in order to do, you either have to have a moment of genius in which you understand exactly where you should position yourself to not be stepping on the symbol when it stops spinning and the attack goes off, which you can actually have quite easily if you play the game enough, or you have to be a devout Christian and have God guide your movements through your hands, cause otherwise you're getting fucking electrocuted. As I said though, if you treat his teleport move as a warning sign and start preemptively moving forward in any direction, chances are that you're gonna be able to run out of the attack's range. Lightning Strike rewards foresight and smart positioning, as well as the ultimate focus you need to be capable of if you wanna dodge it in close quarters. As I said, Lightning Joe likes to call the names of his moves out loud, which other than adding to his personality can serve as an audio cue that helps you with identifying the move that he's about to do, even if you can't directly see him at the moment, which is great as it makes the fight much more fair. A lot of thought went into this, as every single boss in this game has exceptional audio cues that you can tie to every one of their individual abilities as soon as you hear them for the first time and see what move comes after. What makes this possible is the fact that most audio cues consist of spoken sentences that are easy to hear and assimilate, because most of them are either direct threats to your well-being or unsportsmanlike comments about your skills, which should both clue you in that you're about to be attacked. The rest of the audio cues, that are mostly different forms of laughter, are exaggerated enough that they too can be easily used to your advantage. Visually, every boss's moves are insanely well telegraphed as well, and even the ones that don't have unique animations tied to them, like Keats' clone split, will still have something that tells you they're coming. In Keats' case, he usually never runs directly towards you, so when he does, it's almost 100% guaranteed that he used a clone split, meaning that this attack is so well thought out that it's clearly telegraphed purely by his movement and behavior. Combining the great audio cues with the clear visual telegraphs results in the player always knowing exactly what their opponent's gonna do, but only if they're observational enough to notice this stuff and take it into account. The next boss is Papa Tonio, who's unfortunately one of the more lackluster ones. His move list consists of a grenade throw that will rarely reach you, resulting in you having to take no defensive measures or really make any reactive or preemptive decisions at all. His other main attack move is just firing a lot of bullets at you, which are easily dodged using any of the usual methods you like, and have no alternative way of dealing with them. His most interesting move is this one, where he starts screaming like a retard and if left uninterrupted for a few seconds, heals a big part of his HP. You have to knock him down in order to stop it, so you either have to make use of the boss knockdown mechanic or do a kick up and knock him down that way. That's pretty much it for this guy in terms of moves. He also has no interesting shooting pattern or anything like that. He does tend to call out to his goons much more than any of the other bosses capable of that, which could have created a very interesting dynamic if only Papa Tonio wasn't the most basic and bland meatball of a boss fight. Even the design of his arena has nothing interesting going for it, which if the fight itself was more interesting wouldn't have mattered and even could have been a positive, as empty arenas allow you to completely focus on everything the boss does, which can work really well for bosses with greatly designed movesets, but that just isn't the case here. There are some pillars at the edges of the arena that Tonio can end up behind, but that doesn't happen very often, and when it does, it doesn't add anything to the fight, other than maybe forcing you to change your positioning for a bit until he steps out from behind it. These pillars are nothing like the object in the middle of Keats' arena, and Papa Tonio ending up behind them sometimes is probably an oversight. Everything I said about boss fights in general in this game stands true in this one as well though. So he at least has the amount of depth and quality that those mechanics and design decisions provide, resulting in a fight that can still be kinda fun because of it. And also because the core mechanics of the game are really good, but when compared to other boss fights in this game that have much more going for them in terms of uniqueness, this fight doesn't match their quality at all. There was potential here for a fight that requires you to keep having to get close to Tonio in order to stop him from healing, but also having to keep your distance from him so he doesn't fuck you up with grenades. All the while his goons are coming in and making dodging everything much more complex. A more thought out design would be required for this, as well as a grenade throwing move that can actually hit you. It could have been great, and to be fair it should have been, as in the narrative, Papa Tonio is the boss of the syndicate that Koro is working for, and also the person that took Koro in when he had nowhere to go. So a good showdown would have been the only proper way to end this relationship after Tonio's betrayal, which makes the boss fight that you get that much more disappointing. In terms of funny shit, other than Crow saying that he wants to kick the bucket in the cutscene before the fight, Papa Tonio also has a great line for you if you happen to die to him.
Just like your mom did.
No matter how bad the voice acting is as a whole, you have to admit the delivery here was on point. The next fight is the unwinnable one with Judas, where it turns out that the guy named Judas betrays you. It's way too obvious, but at the same time, if your name is Judas in real life, it's not like you're gonna sit there and think, man, I can't betray anybody. It's too cliche, so it's kinda realistic in a way. Judas was a part of the Sleeper's gang, but interestingly enough wasn't an actual Sleeper agent. The whole time that he was friends with Crow and in a relationship with their mutual friend and maybe love interest Keiko, he was constantly aware of his mission, mentioning that he got close to forgetting it sometimes because of how happy he was with Crow and Keiko. In a way, this makes him something of a Sleeper agent, as he has to wake up from the dream life that he's been living up until now in order to complete his mission, which as a cool detail is reflected in the intro to this fight, in which he looks like he's forcefully awakening himself from his sleep. This animation is unique to this encounter, as in the next one he is much more accepting of his role as a sleeper, even hamming it up a little bit as if he's accepted that he's the villain of the story, which makes this awakening one have even more impact. Other than being unwinnable, the fight here is the same as the one at the end of the game, so I'm gonna save the analysis for when we get there. The only other difference is the stage, and while there's nothing mechanically interesting about it, it highlights one of the game's more detail-oriented aspects, which is the breakability of most objects in the stages. In this one, you're unexpectedly allowed to break a lot of the statues placed around the environment, and in most others you're allowed to break anything that looks like it could be broken. It can be fun to do, and it even adds to the action movie aesthetic of the game in some stages, like in the cafe one where you're engaging in a big shootout while bottles and glasses are breaking around and being broken by you. This is also enhanced by the fact that you can see the bullet casings fly out from your gun and bounce off the ground or any object near you, and if it's quiet enough you can even hear the sound they make when they hit something. This is especially satisfying to hear at the end of a level where the music and most other sound effects get cut off, leaving you alone with the sound of the last bullets you fired and the bounce of their bullet casings, which can be pleasing to hear in a sort of calm after the storm type of way. Exactly who you fight as the next boss after Judas beats you, Keiko dies, and you end up in Japan is up to you. The main story of the game follows a completely linear path that branches off only at the very end, but there's two side stories that you can follow in Japan, one during the current chapter that we're on, chapter 4, and one during chapter 5, with them being exclusive to the chapters as far as I know. The chapter 4 side story can be followed and completed as soon as you beat the first level of the chapter, meaning that you can either skip and have your next boss fight be the main story one that forces you into the next chapter after you beat it, or you can beat the two extra levels of the side story first and fight these guys, Crazy O and Crazy P, with Crazy O being the purple and pink one and Crazy P being the green one. This is the only dual boss fight in the game and it has a lot going for it in terms of depth, making it a contender for the best boss fight alongside Lightning Joe. The first unique thing about them is that both of their basic methods of attack are exclusive to them, and are used by nobody and nowhere else in the game. Crazy O fires a blast of pink circles at you, usually doing it from short range, though they can actually travel quite far despite him mostly choosing to use them up close, which can end up surprising surprising you if you aren't ready for it sometimes. I believe that it's possible to dodge them any way you want, unless they're fired at you from up close, in which case your safest option is using the avoid ability. What makes this attack interesting is that while you're usually dodging it from up close, Crazy P, the other guy, will fire a long-range laser from afar, making it so you can't exclusively focus on what's going on right in front of you. You have to be aware of what both of these guys are doing at all times, otherwise you'll most likely lose the fight. The laser by itself can be practically dodged just as easily as the blast of circles, but when you have to constantly factor in both of these attacks into your gameplay, they can get quite tricky to deal with. It's particularly praiseworthy that even though these attacks are only used in one boss fight in an optional side quest, they're still perfectly up to par with all the others in terms of audio cues and telegraphs. For example, you can hear Crazy P's laser charging itself up way before he fires it at you, so even if he ends up doing it outside of your field of view or while you're focusing on his friend, the attack is still completely fair, and that's not even considering that the markers on the sides of your screen and the minimap work here, same as they would for multitudes of normal enemies. Both bosses also have a dropkick move that travels very far and that they can launch towards you almost instantly, which makes being aware of their positioning and being able to properly juggle your focus between them that much more important, as if you don't, you're bound to get hit by a basic attack or a dropkick from either of them. The startup speed of the dropkick may make it look a bit unfair, but unless you're up in one of their faces, which by itself makes you deserving of taking damage, you're always provided with enough time to react, and you can even tell if it's coming from off screen by the unique sound they make when they do it. When they're close enough to each other, they can also jump at a certain point in sync and trade HP between each other, making both of their HP bars equal, with the one with the higher amount of HP left giving some of it to the more weakened one. This move is really great, as it serves as a counter to the strategy of exclusively attacking only one of the bosses, so when they die you're left in a 1v1 situation with the other, which is a common strategy for dual boss fights, and one that the player might automatically employ. This ability ensures that for most of the fight you'll be engaging in a 2v1, making it a dual boss fight that can retain its peak complexity for most of its duration, which is great. Another thing they can do when they're close together is blow a kiss at you, which takes the form of a bunch of flying hearts that can damage you if you get hit by them. This one is a little more dangerous, as they don't necessarily need to jump close together before they do it. The hearts cover a wide amount of the arena, so exclusively relying on avoid for dodging here, as you may be doing for most other highly damaging boss attacks in the game, can actually result in you getting hit sometimes because it won't always cover enough distance to put you out of the attack's range before your iframes run out. An issue with this attack is that during bullet time, because of one of the visual effects that turning it on will create on the screen, the hearts look like a mass of light, which makes it a bit harder to determine their hitbox while using bullet time. The mechanical purpose of these visual effects is, I assume, to ensure that the player can always clearly tell when they're in bullet time and when they're not. You might say that if you're not retarded, this should be easy for you, as you're the one manually turning bullet time on and off. But with all the things you have to think about and react to during the extremely fast-paced gameplay, the designers made the right choice to make sure that the player can always be 100% confident in the fact that bullet time is either on or off, especially because using that ability is an extremely important core part of the gameplay, so polishing it as much as possible is a must. This massive light thing that happens because of the effects is most likely a glitch though, as it just doesn't look like something the developers intended to happen, specifically because it doesn't occur anywhere else in the game. Back to the attack itself, since it only requires them to be in close proximity to each other without jumping together, and since there's no animation or audio that necessarily plays before it, the telegraph that tells you to be ready for the move is their positioning relative to each other, which I already said can be complex to keep track of. What's great about their other duo abilities is that they have an audio cue that informs you that they're about to jump close to each other and do one of them, which lightens the load on you by a lot, since if there wasn't an audio cue and they didn't need to jump to each other, all the duo attacks would share the same telegraph, which would end up being unfair. These duo attacks can also be interrupted by a knockdown, and it's great that since they only do them together, if one of them is knocked down, the attack doesn't go through, which is also very fair. One of these attacks' more seemingly unfair aspects is that the bosses often get invincibility frames during parts of them. But since they're so fruity and their animations are so long because of that, if you're able to always do damage during them, the fight would end too quickly and be way too easy. The way to fix that would be to make their animations much shorter. But that would rob the bosses of expressing their personality in gameplay, which would be a shame as it does make the fight more unique. The animations being this long also has the mechanical purpose of giving you time to position yourself properly, which you certainly have to make use of, as these moves are harder to dodge and also do much more damage. The last and most damaging duo move that they can do is jumping to each other and firing this super laser, that they call out as their crazy special and that can take off a big chunk of your HP if you don't avoid it. It can fuck you in the ass. It comes at you really fast, but you can still use avoid to dodge it, so it isn't actually that bad. All the attack moves that these guys have aren't individually hard to deal with, but having to keep track of both of them constantly and never being able to turn the fight into a 1v1 until the very end makes you susceptible to making more mistakes, which are then usually punished by heavy damage. It makes the fight positively stand out among the other boss fights in the game, which all have you focusing on a single opponent. It's not hard to imagine how a 2v1 boss fight could easily end up being a mess if it's not designed well enough, which makes the design of Crazy O and P deserve even more praise. Not to be redundant, but since dual boss fights are even more reliant on good audio cues and telegraphs, I have to mention how good they are here and in all other boss fights as a whole. I'm not gonna keep mentioning their quality when talking about all the remaining bosses again and again, but I can't stress enough how important this shit is for a game like 10,000 Bullets, and how praiseworthy it is that they got them perfectly right every time, neither overdoing nor underutilizing them. Another really important aspect of this fight is the arena design. The arena is a circle with a big pillar in the middle that can sometimes serve to separate the two bosses and make the fight easier, making it all the more better that they have the ability to jump to each other and seem to be programmed in a way that makes sure they're never far apart from each other for very long. Cause if you're able to keep them separated, the fight wouldn't be much of a challenge, or it at least wouldn't challenge the player in the way the developers seem to have intended. Depending on your positioning relative to Crazy O and Crazy P, you can use this pillar as protection from some attacks. But just as the pillar in Keats' arena, it can also work against you in some ways. The unique thing about this one is that there's two elevator doors on its sides. Enemies spawn in from them sometimes, doing it even without the bosses calling for them, which doesn't happen in any other boss fight. On normal difficulty, which is a difficulty you're forced on whenever you start a new game for the first time, the normal enemies that come out of the elevator are the knife throwing types, which makes the fight a bit more complex. Nowhere near as much as the rocket launcher enemies that appear on higher difficulties do though. That shit gave me a bit of a complex. There's a lot to say about how the game changes on higher difficulties as a whole, but I'll save that for later. One interesting detail about this fight is that if you die you get to hear Crazy O and P speak some Spanish for you. Which, per my research, means something like go cry to your mama. It's not fucking interesting at all, but I spent half an hour trying to transcribe and translate it, so I had to put it in. I also wanna put it in Boris, the character you unlock after you beat Crazy O and P and therefore complete the side story. I don't wanna fuck her that much though, so I'll talk about her later. While we're on a suggestive theme, I might as well mention that other than Crazy P's name possibly being a reference to a band called Crazy Penis, I could find no clue as to why those names were chosen for them and what the O and P in them mean. The next boss after them is Little John, possibly named in reference to Robin Hood's companion, whose name is also an ironic reference to the large size of his build. Little John isn't really interesting to talk about, as all his moves, excluding only one, can be accurately summed up by saying that he can fire one rocket at a time a bit faster than he usually does, and finally fire a bunch of rockets at once. The rockets seem to have some fairly weak heat-seeking capability that only activates sometimes, but that ultimately doesn't change the fact that dodging all these attacks requires basic movement and mindless use of the avoid ability at best. You can also shoot his rockets out of the air, which is cool, but it's not enough to save a fight that just didn't have that much thought put into it. His only other move is jumping high into the air and creating a damaging shockwave upon landing on the ground. The shockwave part of this move has never in my 50 hours of playtime hit me even once, but I have been hit by the more interesting part of this attack, which is the jump itself. If you're close enough to Little John as he launches off of the ground, he'll try to jump on your head like you're a Goomba on his way back down. which if you aren't careful with your movement can be quite surprising as you can't lock onto him if he's right above your head. It's a shame that keeping a moderate distance between you and him prevents him from trying to jump on you, as I think a gap closer like that could make him much more dangerous than he is, which is something that he certainly needs. In terms of stage design, this bridge is pretty much an empty flat space, excluding the truck that's in the middle of it, where you most likely never end up taking the fight to anyway. If you somehow end up on low HP during this boss fight, you might want to destroy the truck and take the HP orb that's inside though. On normal difficulty, HP and gun gauge replenishing orbs are placed around some levels and boss fight arenas, which gives you some much needed room for mistakes on your first playthrough. There's an interesting design dilemma at play here. As a designer, do you give the player a chance to replenish their HP and gun gauge fully and therefore allow them to finish the level or beat the boss despite the many mistakes they could have made? Or do you refrain from giving them such help, causing them to die and restart the level or boss fight much more until they're good enough to make less mistakes? There isn't an objectively right answer here, as what the right choice is depends on what your intentions for the game are like. On a first playthrough, one player might enjoy taking on a challenge but still getting to finish the stage or beat the boss at the end, without having to repeatedly restart too much because they made X amount of mistakes. Because 10,000 Bullets is a challenging game even on its default normal difficulty, a player like this will be forced to improve though. But since the difficulty curve is generally well maintained, despite having a few irregularities, their improvement would most likely be on a steady increase during their entire playtime, as long as they don't give up if they get stuck anywhere, which can easily happen even with a perfectly designed difficulty curve, as players can have immense struggle with something that others will find extremely easy, without there necessarily being a concrete reason for it. This steadily improving player would ultimately enjoy both challenge and improvement without much punishment, which might solidify the game as a great experience for them. A different player might find the amount of challenge and required improvement to be too low for the experience to be great for them though. They might enjoy being sent back to the start of a level or boss fight because they enjoy the greater challenge and unwillingness to hold the player's hand immensely. What 10,000 Bullets does is allow for both types of players to be pleased with the experience by way of thoughtfully designed difficulty options, which is, in my experience, very rare, but it sadly fucks it up a bit by not allowing the player to pick a higher difficulty on their first playthrough, making players who enjoy a bigger challenge from the get-go complete the game on normal first. It's baffling that that's the case, mainly because if you die enough times on normal, the game gives you an option to switch to easy difficulty, and if you die more after you switch to it, you're giving the option to switch to very easy, but no option to switch to hard though, not unless you beat the game first. After you defeat Little John, you enter into chapter 5, which starts with a tutorial for the new character that's automatically unlocked at this point in the story, Dragon. For now, I just want to mention how great it is that his tutorial and the tutorial at the very start of the game can be skipped completely, by selecting yes when the game asks you if you wanna skip them. Tutorials are obviously important in a game like this, especially on the first playthrough, but a lot of games tend to either make them or at least some parts of them completely unskippable, or they force you to manually skip through dialogue that serves as a tutorial, which can be annoying on repeat playthroughs. Thankfully this game doesn't do this shit, but it does have some questionable things like it. You can only skip the tutorials after you watch or skip the cutscenes before them. A reason for this might be the fact that these cutscenes give some personality to their characters and in Dragon's case even serve as an introduction. It's possible that you might wanna watch them even if you'll be skipping the tutorials after, so this is okay. More questionable is the fact that these tutorials give you skill points upon completion. 1000 for Crow's tutorial and 1500 for Dragon's tutorial. This means that skipping the tutorial sets you back 2500 skill points in total, which is fucking retarded. It's not like not having them will fuck up your playthrough or anything, but it makes it so any efficient playthrough of the game where you upgrade everything as soon as you can has to include going through both tutorials, which can be annoying. There's no real reason to award points to people who complete the tutorials, but if they felt like doing it like that, they should have given the points to you even if you skip them, which as I said the game directly allows you to do. It's fucking gay. The next boss you fight can either be the second and final side story's boss Deadman Albright or the main story boss Shirasagi. Deadman Albright is the worst fight in the game for sure, as other than his character model and voice lines, he's basically a carbon copy of the first boss in the game, Keats. Other than being a bit more aggressive, he doesn't have even one unique move or quirk. Keats is almost completely recycled here. The only other difference is that the arena design is much worse here. It's not only not unique to Deadman Albright, as it's actually a part part of the level that you see later on when you go through it in the main story and play through the full level, but it's also full of exploding barrels and metal bars hung in the air that I assume just weren't removed when the level was taken from the main story and reused for the side story, which creates a problem during the fight with Albright. Since you can lock onto all of these objects, the locking onto environmental objects problem presents itself in full force here, except that it's even worse because the cloning move removes your lock on. The original purpose of this in Keats' fight was to confuse you about who the real Keats is if you were locked onto him before he did his cloning move. And while it serves the same purpose here, the issue is that when you press the lock on button after Albright clones himself, there's a 99% chance that you lock onto an exploding barrel or a set of hanging metal bars, which can really fuck you up, especially if you expect to lock onto Albright or a clone of his, so you preemptively start shooting and end up locking onto a barrel, usually resulting in you blowing yourself up. Because there's so many barrels and metal bars, even if you anticipate this and press the switch target button as fast as possible, you'll most likely just lock onto another environmental object. This can turn your character in a direction you don't want them to be facing, or just confuse you completely, as you can't know what you lock onto next, which can easily cause you to take a lot of damage and die. Your only option here is to destroy all the environmental objects before you start focusing on Albright. It's quite possible that this was intentional, as otherwise the developers had to have not playtested this fight at all to not know about this problem, or they had to have recognized it as a problem and just ignored it, which is really bad. In the case that it was intentional, the objects would have probably been kept in the stage to challenge the player to come up with a way to deal with them, but that's a really hollow challenge that only serves to highlight the problem with the lock-on system, so I doubt that that's the case. The best explanation I can come up with for the low quality of the fight is that for one reason or another, it was thrown together extremely quickly, evidenced by all the problems with the environmental objects in the arena, and the fact that the boss is essentially a complete copy of Keats. What makes it even worse is that Albright is the villain of Alice's story. He's the one that killed her grandfather in front of her when she was a child, and he was the only family she had left, which hypes him up as this big bad villain that she wants her vengeance on, so her showdown with him should have been way better than this disappointing shit. I personally enjoy fighting him despite all of this because the music and gameplay themselves are still very enjoyable, and having another boss fight, even if it's this low effort, gives me more time to spend with them in each playthrough. After you destroy all the objects, it's just a slightly worse version of Keats' fight, so it can still be somewhat enjoyable. It's just that objectively the level of effort and thought here is extremely low, and the game would have obviously been better if he had a unique moveset and if his stage was better designed. Thankfully, the main story boss fight with Shirosagi is much better, though not without some flaws of its own. First, I wanna mention her ability to use bullet time and talk about bosses using bullet time in general. I haven't really talked about this during each boss's analysis because there isn't that much to say. Whenever a boss enters their own bullet time, you get slowed down while they can still move about freely. But if you turn your own bullet time on, you'll be able to move as well, and since your bullet time will be usually the exact same level as theirs or better, if you've been upgrading it as soon as you're allowed to, this doesn't make that much of a difference. The bosses will always be slower than you since that's a core part of the game's design, and it's the same for Shirosagi too. Her basic attack is throwing knives at you, and what's great about it is that she'll try to predict your movement and throw them at the location that she anticipates you end up at. So for example, if you're strafing to the left, she'll throw a knife a bit to the left of you, making you walk into it unless you switch directions or stop moving. Once you understand how this works, it can create an interesting dynamic where you'll be trying to bait her to throw a knife in one direction by walking in it, while you're constantly ready to start strafing in the opposite direction to dodge it. It can make you feel like you're constantly trying to outsmart each other by anticipating the future, and mechanically you kinda are, which can make the fight really engaging. Depending on how good your positioning is, you can also stick to strafing sometimes, and dodge the attack while ending up on the outside of it if you're fast enough, which doesn't really give you any advantages, but it's still great that you can do it, mainly because it can feel really cool. Her other offensive moves aren't that interesting, with one of them being throwing a bigger amount of knives at you after she charges up for a bit, and the other consisting of her throwing a bunch of talismans at you that remain on the stage unless destroyed, and I believe drain your gun gauge when touched. She also has a melee move that is easily dodged, but can be dangerous if you don't expect it. As you can see, the main draw of the fight is her basic attacks and the quote-unquote mind games that are attached to them. The first time she baits you to walk into one of her knives can be kinda mind-blowing for a second, especially if you don't expect it. You can use the avoid ability every time she throws a knife to avoid having to deal with these tricks, but that prevents you from shooting her more, which you really don't want to happen when she has her shield down. This is the fight's biggest flaw, her shield. You can never damage her until she stops holding it up, and that can get frustrating, mainly because she frequently decides to keep it up for unreasonably long stretches of time. The best and coincidentally only way I found to get around this with Koro is to constantly kick her up in the air until she decides to stop using her shield. She usually drops it after a few kick-ups, allowing you to damage her until she puts it up again. While her shield is down, she seemingly becomes more aggressive, but it's more of the same really. The issue with this tactic is that it almost completely trivializes the fight, as after a kick-up, she barely has enough time for a single attack until you can kick her up again. But the core of the issue is that there's no other tactic to use here. Your only other option is to wait until she puts her shield down by herself, but as I already mentioned, this can be really annoying because of her being allowed to take her sweet time with it, which leaves you with nothing to do but dodge, and really makes me wonder what the intentional way of beating her was. If the developers wanted you to not cheese her, they should have made her drop her guard down much faster. Better yet, given you a non-cheesy way to get her to do it. If they didn't want to do that, then the fight would be ultimately better off without this mechanic at all, as it seems like it's just wasting your time. I get that the intention behind it might have been to force the player to have patience and challenge them by having them dodge her attacks for long stretches of time without a means to fire back, but that makes the majority of the fight lack the depth that your offensive capabilities provide, which leaves you with dodging as your only task during these periods. As I said, dodging her attacks can be very fun since they're so well designed, but that by itself is not enough for the boss fight as a whole to be good. Again, significantly shortening the maximum amount of time in which you can have her shield up would really alleviate the issue. But since they didn't do that, the best way to go through the fight without having to wait around for her is to kick her up until she drops her shield and then starts playing fair. This highlights another issue of the game and also an interesting question about the player's enjoyment of it, or even of video games as a whole. The issue is that the majority of bosses in the game can be cheesed by using the kick-up ability the same way it can be used to cheese Shirasagi. Some of these bosses might make it a bit harder for you sometimes, but it's still possible to do, to the extent of making the fights much easier than they normally are. Some players might take enjoyment in cheesing the fights like this, but other players may stumble upon this cheese by accident and just keep using it whenever they can cause it's practical, which ultimately might result in them taking lesser enjoyment out of the game if they were otherwise the type of player to enjoy its boss fights more when fought normally. When you as a player find a way to play a game so practical that it allows you to not engage with some or a lot of its mechanics, you should ask yourself if it's possible that you would enjoy the game more if you refrain from that particular practicality. I've seen some people say that if the first Devil May Cry allowed them to beat it only using the Stinger move, they would absolutely do it and miss a lot of the game's more interesting mechanics in the process. While the way a player might play through a game or deal with some particular challenges is entirely up to them and the design of the game they're playing, this is certainly the wrong approach. It's at least worth a try to engage with any given game's mechanics as best as you can, because you can never know if you might end up loving it, and if you don't, then you can always go back to doing things the way you wanna do them. There's just no need to potentially miss out on a great experience because of a needlessly close-minded approach. I might be sounding a little patronizing here, or I might sound like I'm trying to convince you to take drugs, which is not my intention. I just want as many people to enjoy this shit as much as possible, and maybe what I'm saying can help somebody do that. In regards to 10,000 Bullets, I refrain from cheesing any other boss that's not Shirasagi, and I know I'd enjoy the game much less if I didn't. The next and last boss before the final one is a single guy called Guitar Man. Yeah, English is my second language, but that's really how they wrote it. I actually have a theory about this. First, I've gotta mention how much inspiration this guy's design draws from the movie Desperado. The main evidence for this is his guitar case, which doubles as a machine gun and a rocket launcher. It's a combination of Kampa and Kino's guitar cases, which serve as machine guns and a rocket launcher respectively. It's the poses that Guitar Man takes while he's firing his rocket launcher that serve as a concrete link to the movie, as they're almost exactly the same as the ones that Kino takes while firing his rocket launcher. Knowing this, Guitar Man's one and only line during his cutscene,
Let's pray.
can also be directly linked to this line in Desperado.
Let's play.
This inspiration, other than being a nice detail and reference, also could be the reason why this guy's name is Guitar Man. Barring the possibility of a simple typo, using man instead of man might be a reference to the fact that the boss is a combination of all the guitar case men from Desperado. Another possibility is that the boss fight could have originally been a duo or even a trio boss fight, more closely resembling the 3 guitar men from the movie, but got cut down to just one, with the name getting left like that as an inside reference. That's a bit more of a reach though, so I'd say if it's not a typo, then it has to either be a combination of the 2 possibilities or just the first one. As a boss, Guitar Man is pretty well designed. His basic attack has him either shooting at you with his gun or with his guitar, and while the bullets will generally fly straight towards you, there are some tactics involved here. Since his movement generally consists of him strafing either left or right, if you strafe in the opposite direction that he's currently moving in, his bullets will not hit you, which saves you some gun gauge and allows you to constantly shoot back at him if you can change your strafing direction fast enough. Doing this perfectly causes you and him to move back and forth in a circle, as he won't close the distance between you, and you ideally shouldn't do that either. It can make the fight feel and look really cool, which can go a long way for some people, like me. One move that he uses during the first half of the fight has him striking a pose and shooting rockets at you that you can quite easily shoot out of the air, as long as you don't mash the shoot button and miss your shots and get fucking hit. The other one he'll do before the half point is fire a barrage of bullets at you that also won't hit you as long as you're careful. After about half of the fight goes by, he'll strike a pose again, but fire a bunch of rockets at once this time around. And he'll continue firing them after each barrage of rockets is done exploding for about 4 or 5 times in a row. You can't target him while he's firing the rockets, but what makes him different from and better than Shirasagi here is that you can still damage him by using your superior intellect and shooting him without using lock-on, or if you're more of a brawn type, you can target him for a few seconds if you shoot his rockets down fast enough. It's a mechanically well designed boss fight, but it doesn't have enough depth to it to be called great. Who you fight for the final boss fight is dependent on which character you choose after this dialogue sequence on the balcony. Crow gets to fight Judas, while all the other characters go against Chameleon, who I'll analyze first. Chameleon's inclusion in the game as an alternative final boss is great, as it adds some replayability to the game, but the fight itself isn't very well designed. Her basic attack has nothing of note, she just shoots at you, which wouldn't be a problem if her special moves had more depth to them. As her name suggests, she can use her chameleon ability to turn into some of the bosses you faced before and use a single one of their abilities. She can use Lightning Joe's Lightning Strike, Shirasagi's melee move and Little Joe's Shockwave Jump. And while I have fought her a decent amount of times, it's possible that there are moves she can do that I haven't seen yet, so I can only judge her based on my experiences with her. That doesn't change a whole lot though, since her reusing these or possibly any other boss's moves is a problem by itself. The idea of Chameleon reusing moves can only be good if the moves she reuses are modified in some way to be at least slightly different from the ones the original bosses use. Since if they're not, the player will already have seen these moves and most likely know exactly what to do against them. Not changing the moves in any way is lazy, and the choice of reused moves is also quite bad. Lightning Strike is a decent pick, as it's one of the harder moves to deal with in the entire game, so it's fitting for a copycat final boss to be copying this ability. But Shirasagi's melee move is so uninteresting and easy to dodge that I didn't even mention it in her section, and Little John's jump is exactly the same. If you're taking only a single move from any of the bosses, there's an infinite amount of better choices than these two. A good and interesting combination of 3 moves taken from different bosses could have given this fight an interesting identity while still saving some resources, which makes it even worse that the moves they ultimately chose don't go well together at all. She at least has some unique moves of her own, which is good, but the moves themselves aren't. She can jump up in the air and just stand on it somehow, and this functionally changes absolutely nothing. She still just shoots at you and you still just shoot at her, except that she's standing on air instead of on the ground. I don't know what the idea behind this was, maybe it was left unfinished, cause I can't believe somebody at the studio saw the final version of this move and thought it does something. Her second unique ability is creating a bunch of slow moving tornadoes that at best you may need to factor into your movement. Other than that, they just slowly travel towards you until they disappear. Her final special move is the only one that can put you in any danger, but I've seen her do it only once, so I think it's something that she pulls out quite rarely. She sets herself on fire and starts jumping back and forth above your head while dropping some sort of exploding fireballs on you. I believe that movement and the avoidability should work as they usually do here, so it really isn't even that dangerous unless you get surprised by it, which stands true for pretty much everything that can damage you in this game anyway. Her stage also isn't anything special or unique, which is pretty bad considering that the fight itself isn't very complex or unique either. Now, the final boss of the game and of this analysis, Judas. He always starts his fight with a spaced out barrage of homing bullets that you need to dodge with avoid by learning the timing and being observant, as some of the bullets won't always arrive instantly to you, especially the last few ones, so you really need to be careful here and not mindlessly spam avoid or think you're in the clear and stop being careful just to get hit a second or two later. One of the first things you may notice is that Judas's bullet time is equally as powerful as your maximum upgraded bullet time, maybe even a bit more powerful. Because if you ever turn your bullet time off or have it run out on you while Judas has his on, your character will be completely stopped in time, no matter what he's currently doing. As I said, this doesn't matter that much, since you'll be staying in bullet time for 99% of the fight anyway, but it is pretty great that this detail is implemented into the game and works as expected. Something you might see me doing during the fight is using the avoid ability, while Judas is using his version of it. I do this here because the avoid ability slows down time for the first half of its animation if your bullet time isn't on, and then speeds it up slightly during its second half. If you do it while your bullet time is on, I believe that it doesn't slow down time during its first half anymore, but it for sure speeds it up during the second half. So since the decision was made to have your gun gauge recharge faster during the fight with Judas, and since you can't damage him while he's dodging, I use the avoid ability while Judas is using his to speed up his animation instead of just sitting there and waiting for it to end. This makes the fight flow much better and doesn't put you at any disadvantage unless you use avoid a bit too late during his animation, and allow him to start moving before your animation finishes. While we're talking about finishing, I might as well say that his barrier move gives you enough time to jack off and come until you have something to do again. Shooting at him when he stands still and turns it on will do nothing except make your bullets fly back at you when he turns it off. It's a conceptually cool move that you also have, but for a boss to have it, it needs to do something more in order to not leave you with nothing to do. After the start of the fight, he'll switch between firing normal bullets and homing bullets, which is where the main challenge of the fight comes from. Homing bullets seem to come at you much faster than his normal ones, so your eyes really need to be glued to his guns in order for you to react to the homing bullets as fast as possible. Thankfully, the trace they leave is pink, which differentiates them from his normal bullets and is essentially what allows you to react to them. What accompanies the homing bullets as the main challenge of the fight is this move, where he suddenly shoots himself at you and melees you. You can dodge it with avoid, but since he'll continue bumping into you during your iframes waiting to beat you up, if you don't time it right, he'll be able to get you before his charge ends, so you need to wait as much as possible before dodging when you see this move coming, which can be quite tense. The only other thing he can do is place traps around his arena, which can be taken care of by just shooting at them. But there is the slightly interesting choice here of either shooting at Judas to end the fight faster or focusing on your own survival and taking care of the traps first. His arena isn't anything special, with the only obstacles in it being these pillars that can add to the aesthetic of the fight when you're running in parallel to them and timing your shots so they don't block them. It's good that there isn't anything more than that in it, as Judas himself demands most of your attention because of the fast reactions that his moves require to dodge. An interesting detail about Judas is that other than his melee move, he uses the exact same abilities that you can, which was probably done to juxtapose Judas to Koro and make the player really feel like they're fighting with a close friend that even shares their abilities with them. Overall, it's a pretty good and difficult final boss, the difficulty being praiseworthy as it was achieved despite the decision to boost your gun gauge recharging speed. You can abuse this slightly by spamming moves that use up more of your gun gauge, but since it doesn't recharge that much faster, it doesn't allow you to fully cheese the fight. And you can also choose not to do this if you want to have a better experience. I've been analyzing these bosses through the perspective of a player that generally doesn't use much of the abilities outside of avoid, but it's also worth talking about how these abilities can change your experience with the bosses and the game as a whole, both positively and negatively, and how they can add a lot of depth to it as well in some cases. Blind is one of the first abilities you unlock, and in its base form it allows you to shoot 2 bullets from the sides of your character, while in its upgraded form it also shoots 1 from the back. This move requires a lot of skill to use efficiently, as positioning yourself in order to have 2 enemies at your sides, and maybe 1 behind you, can be quite difficult to do amidst all the usual chaos. What makes it worth using despite that is the fact that when using blind, your bullets will turn into critical shots if the last normal bullet you fired was a critical shot as well, which means that blind allows you to simultaneously fire 2 or 3 critical shots in an instant. Using this when you create or have an opportunity for it can boost your DPS and help you clear rooms faster by a lot. lot, but the skill needed to do it balances it out, making it so it can be fun to use because it requires some effort to be powerful, which also makes it a very well designed ability. I can't say the same about Disorder though, which is the next ability the Crow unlocks. It allows you to fire a barrage of bullets at up to 3 enemies at a time, but can also be used on a single enemy for a ton of damage. What's supposed to make it balanced is the high gun gauge cost, as it takes about a third of your gun gauge to use, but that really isn't enough, especially because Disorder activates and contributes to the combo meter, which means that you can usually get a lot of your gun gauge back. It's so powerful and useful despite its cost that the game can be much more fun without using it. A big factor in that is that it requires barely any thought to use efficiently. The only things to keep in mind are that you yourself can cancel it anyway, while your enemies can interrupt it if they hit you, but that's not even close to being a good enough drawback to make the move harder to use, and also doesn't give you much to think about, especially since your bullets will interrupt most normal enemy attacks and not give them much of a chance to interrupt yours anyway. A higher skill floor for this ability would have made its inclusion in the game a much better decision, but I think that it still probably would have ended up being too powerful. My idea about fixing it, while still keeping it mostly as it is, would be to make it a bit more powerful, but significantly increase its gun gauge cost, so much so that after using it, you would be essentially left with barely any. This would turn the move into something that you use while you're cornered, or maybe something you save for a last ditch effort to win or save yourself by finishing off the final enemies of a level or a boss that's low on HP. This way, using the ability would require much more thought on your part, as if you use it carelessly, it could leave you with barely any gun gauge to activate bullet time with, which would in most cases result in you taking heavy damage or straight up dying. Being able to use it in a combo is good by itself, but in the case that it's still kept like that, the move would have to fully empty your gun gauge to account for the slight refuel that your combo will give you, but that still might leave you with too much gun gauge, so ideally if Disorder is used in a combo, that combo should give much less gun gauge after it's completed. The next move you unlock is Energy Shield. As far as I know, this ability blocks absolutely every attack in the game, but it's not really a good inclusion in it, because using it halts gameplay to a complete standstill, leaving you with nothing to do but wait until the animation's over. There's no skill to it as well, you just press a button, block everything, and if you've upgraded it, the shield fires back most of the projectiles at the enemies that fire them at you, which can be really boring. It is interesting as an addition to your defensive options, because every other maneuver and ability has you either avoiding projectiles by way of positioning, or using iframes to go through them without taking damage, but since it lacks any complexity, the only thing it can ultimately do is hurt the experience, unless you enjoy doing nothing and being rewarded for it. Tying some sort of mechanic to the shield or giving it any sort of drawback would have improved its balance and lack of depth by a lot. But what certainly needs to be addressed when redesigning an ability like this is the fact that it completely interrupts the flow of gameplay. I never use it because of this, as I don't want to press a button and do fucking nothing for the next few seconds, as that just isn't fun for me. And while the player can choose not to use it like I do, it's still disappointing that this ability is so lacking in complexity, because a properly designed shield ability could have been a great addition to your defensive kit, giving you even more ways to deal with enemy attacks. After Energy Shield you unlock Rage, and when you activate it your character starts automatically moving around the place and attacking every enemy around them. This ability has some really cool unique animations which can be fun to watch, but it has the same problem that Energy Shield does. You just sit there and watch. It gives you iframes as well, so in some cases there can be some thought behind the way you use it, as you could for example time it just before a bullet hits you and dodge it with the iframes. But that's it for this move in terms of depth. This one is very disappointing too, as it could have for example been something akin to a Rage mode, where your core moveset changes while it's activated and allows you to do all this cool shit manually. You could still take no damage during this Rage mode, but to balance it out, getting hit could take a chunk off of your gun gauge instead. This would have made the move much more interesting to use, as it would be more interactive and wouldn't interrupt the flow of gameplay. The ability as it is also the baby version of Disorder, as it does much less damage than it, but allows you to dish it out without the possibility of getting interrupted or taking damage yourself, which really makes it useless unless you for some reason want to turn your brain off even more than you can while using Disorder. The homing shot ability is next up, and it's another bad one. Turning it on while using lock on doesn't change much other than making sure that your bullets will never miss, but at this point in the game almost every player should be good enough to not miss any shots, so it's mostly useless. Critical shots aren't affected by this ability in any way at all as well. The only special thing about it is that it allows you to shoot and hit every bullet without using the lock-on mechanic. But because the game was fundamentally designed with a consistent use of that mechanic in mind, Playing without lock-on can be extremely awkward and is obviously inferior in terms of gameplay efficiency and experience. The final ability you unlock is Perfect World. It allows you to use every one of your equipped abilities without using up gun gauge for a maximum amount of 16 seconds, but depletes your whole gun gauge after the time passes. It also makes all gun-related attacks count as critical shots, which makes it extremely overpowered, even if you just fire normally when it's activated. Despite that, the fact that it completely empties your gun gauge means that it's pretty balanced, because as previously mentioned, that will most likely leave you badly hurt or dead. The only way to abuse its power is to use it during the Judas fight, where the faster gun gauge recharging speed will nullify the cost of the whole bar, leaving you without bullet time for just a few seconds at best. If you're playing the game normally, you unlock this ability almost right before the fight, which is baffling, considering how easily it wrecks the fight's balance. Overall, most of these abilities aren't designed very well at all at their core, and can also have a significantly negative effect on your experience by tipping the scales in your favor way too hard in some cases, by completely taking control away from you and causing you to have nothing to do but play with your cock in others. You can choose not to use any of them ever, but they still affect the game's quality, as you can easily imagine a version of this game with better design abilities that ultimately has the potential to be generally more fun and enjoyable than the game is in its current state. There is one thing that elevates the skill mechanic as a whole though, and that's the ability to have 6 different skills available to you that you can smoothly and quickly switch between at all times during gameplay. You can choose which these skills are during the character select menu, and you can even have the freedom to equip the same skill as much times and as in many places as you want to. The skills are separated into 3 slots, and in order to switch between them mid-game, you have to use the D-pad. I always equip a void in each slot because I find it more comfortable and don't use many abilities anyway. But if you don't do that, then there is an insane amount of player expression tied to a high skill ceiling that can be found here. If you learn to constantly switch between each of the 3 skill slots and use the ability that best suits your situation or needs at the moment, the game can get even more skill intensive and fun. And not to repeat myself, but I can't stress this enough, this shit shows the amount of potential for player expression to the fucking roof, especially because different characters have unique skills and mechanics. The Wikipedia page of the game says that there are 4 playable characters: Crow, Alice, Dragon and Boris, but that's fucking wrong. There's a 5th one, Black Alice. Now even at a first glance there's obviously something wrong here. She isn't black, so you gotta wonder, does this Alice maybe jump higher, or have the ability to steal shit? Maybe she can eat watermelon and fried chicken to heal her HP back to full. You know, maybe she uses a basketball as her weapon. But no, there's none of that. Every character plays very differently because of a few key changes. They all have unique animations that differ in length, and specifically for a void end up leaving you in slightly different positions. They all use different weapons that have unique mechanics and quirks exclusively tied to them, along with core differences like the amount of ammunition each weapon can hold and their different firing rates. Every character also has a handful of unique abilities that add to their individuality, with the only exception being Black Alice, who has almost every single skill in the game available to her, which makes her unique in a different way. Some of these abilities have quirks that add depth to the characters that use them, evidenced by examples like the melee move, which allows you to reload and shoot during it, and also has a secret move that allows you to do a kick up if you press back before pressing the melee button. Movement speed and movement in general are also very different for every character, even being the defining traits for some of them. On a first impression, you might think that Alice plays somewhat similarly to Crow, but her much higher movement speed changes a lot about how you approach every situation while playing with her, compared to how you would approach it with Crow. Boris also moves very slowly and is completely unable to jump, which completely changes the whole experience, and more specifically the tactics you have to and can use to get through the game. Closer inspection would reveal much more of the intricacies of each character's unique mechanics, but as of right now, I've used Crow much more than any other character, having only one playthrough with each of them other than Dragon, who I've only used in certain stages. So I'm not really qualified enough to point out anything other than the depth and insane amount of replayability these characters give to the game. In terms of specifics, I do at least want to talk about Dragon, who barely shares any similarities with the other characters. He doesn't use guns and is mostly reliant on melee attacks and his Dragon skill, that allows him to fly across the air and kick somebody for a decent amount of damage. While every other character can change a lot about the player's experience with the gameplay, this Bruce Lee type Jigga is obviously on a whole nother level, which just increases the replayability of the game even more. From the time I've spent using him, I can tell that he can be quite fun to play with, but also has a lot of problems, caused by the fact that most stages just don't seem to be designed around a character that can fly all over the place, and doesn't have a long range attack that he can comfortably rely on. When using any other character, it's clear that the stage design, while not exceptional in terms of innovation or anything like that, perfectly complements the game as a whole, which is worthy of praise by itself. There are essentially two types of stages in this game. One has you going from point A to point B while almost constantly engaging in enemy encounters along the way, while the other has you staying in one location while defeating enemies in waves until they stop coming. On paper this sounds simple enough to become mundane, but in reality getting bored of going through these stages, no matter how many times you play through the whole game, is unlikely, as they're different from each other in many ways other than their core design. The complete change of scenery that every new level provides goes a long way to make that possible. In the first half of the game, where you're in Italy, you have stages that take place in a back alley, an interblock space with a square, an avenue in the streets of Italy, a hotel, and a square full of statues, with the time of day differing between day, sunset and night for each level. The change in scenery is significant and can be felt here, despite the fact that most of these can be summed up as taking place in the streets of Italy. The second half of the game though is inarguably varied, as the stages take place in a club, an aquarium, a subway, a bridge, a dojo, outside and inside of a theater, a cafe, an abandoned factory and a church. My only admittedly subjective complaint here is that while the second half takes place in Japan, there's no stage that has you gunslinging in the streets of Tokyo or something like that. But that isn't a real issue and can even be considered as a good thing if you view it as the developers are avoiding the obvious choice of scenery. I still think it would have been really cool though. Visual variety isn't the only thing that keeps the stages from being boring. As I mentioned before, there's some extra interactivity added to the stages by breakable objects and things like exploding barrels, but there's also other ways you can interact with things. Each individual section of the point A to point B stages is also unique in the way that the architecture around you is never really the same, forcing you to adapt your gameplay to it if you want to survive or do well. I think the video footage I've been playing showcases this well enough. The encounter design and enemy placement is varied as well, mainly because they never really become formulaic enough to be predictable. Enemies will be throwing molotovs at you from a window in a building, shooting rockets at you from the second floor of a club, coming into a stage or being placed in it in all different sorts of formations. Like there'll sometimes be 3 rocket launcher girls standing next to each other or 3 machine gun grunts coming into the stage in a line, or you walk into an enemy ambush with 3 spaced out enemies in front of you and more at each side. There's countless of examples that prove that a lot of thought went into enemy placement in genuinely every single encounter. And that's only supported by the fact that enemy encounters change significantly in each difficulty setting. After normal difficulty you have hard, very hard and hardcore. Compared to normal, more dangerous enemy types start appearing in the game much sooner in these difficulties, and the enemy combinations are often different and much more challenging to deal with. This is another thing that elevates this game above a lot others. In a lot of other games, even to this day, difficulty options are rarely paid enough attention design-wise, resulting in some atrocious experiences on some games as higher difficulties, mainly because of the usual practice of increasing enemy HP and damage and decreasing your HP and damage more and more for each higher difficulty, and then calling it a fucking day. For some games that can actually work, and for some it can be awful, but the fact is that it's always gonna be best if higher difficulties change the experience in a much more thoughtful way. 10,000 bullets also gives more HP to its enemies on hard and above, but even on hardcore they don't even come close to overdoing it. Other changes on hard difficulties include bosses doing more damage and being more aggressive in general, which had to be done thoughtfully as well, as they never get close to being unfair, let alone way too hard to beat. The ending also gets an extra cutscene that reveals some important information for the story if you beat the game on hard or above, and there's other rewards depending on which difficulty you're on as well. The difficulties themselves are unlocked by beating the game on the most high difficulty available to you at the moment, and you're also rewarded with max mode for beating the game on hard and god mode for beating it on very hard. Max mode makes every single skill and upgrade for every single character available for purchase from the start of the game, and God mode gives you an infinite gun gauge and starts you out with every skill at its maximum upgrade. Hardcore unfortunately doesn't give any sort of reward, which is pretty bad. The biggest change alongside encounter design is exclusive to the hardcore difficulty, which removes your option to save the game and retry levels, meaning that if you die once you're forced to start the game from the beginning, and getting no reward for beating this shit is kinda gay, but at least the challenge itself makes it worth it. In general, higher difficulty options, even if not designed very well, will change the way you play the game and force you to pay full attention to it, which can turn into a test that truly reveals the game's quality, because for example, while getting unfairly hit might not matter on lower difficulties and might be something you don't even remember by the end of the game, on higher difficulties and especially on ones that work like hardcore does, games, every single hit matters, so when you're ultimately considering a game's quality after experiencing the game with that mindset, brushing off any issue related to that is not an option anymore, which brings you closer to the truth of any given game's design. Despite the fact that some players might not care about shit like this because it doesn't affect their experience on normal difficulty or lower, it is still very important, as if hypothetically you were making or releasing a game that you want players to have a fair experience with, what would you prefer? To have unfair attacks in the game or to have every attack be completely fair? The choice here is obvious, so even if some players won't care about it, the game will be objectively better if it doesn't have any unfair attacks in it. 10,000 Bullets ultimately holds up under closer inspection even on its highest difficulty, which is another one of the positive aspects that make it such a good game and one of my favorites. Looking back at the points I've made in this video, it's clear that it's not even close to being perfect though, with there being a significant amount of flaws in aspects like boss fights and skills, as well as some smaller problems that do pile up to the extent of affecting the overall experience. What motivated me to make this video the most is the fact that instead of recognizing the game's immense strengths and few but admitted significant weaknesses, the relatively small amount of people that played it didn't even give it a fair chance and wrote it off as some piece of junk, most likely because it was challenging and they didn't take the time to learn how to deal with it properly, which to some extent ultimately resulted in even less people taking an interest in it. I absolutely recommend playing this game, especially if you can appreciate or enjoy games such as DMC, or if you want to see how close a game can get to being a fully 3D third-person shoot 'em up. It deserves a lot more love than it got, and I hope that this video can get some people to play it. If you're not gonna play it, at least listen to the OST. I fully believe that any OG jazz musician would bust all over his record player while listening to this shit.